The sheer ubiquity and speed at which new applications are deployed is disruptive of industries, governments, cherished institutions, and the socio-technical fabric within which our lives are embedded. Do we, humanity, have the intelligence to navigate the promise and perils of technological innovation? How, through ethics, engineering, and oversight, that is, governance, can we shape the future through our actions in the present? Whose values or what values will shape the trajectory of what has been called a fourth industrial revolution? There's a preliminary answer to this last question. Most prominent are the values of a technocratic elite focused upon efficiency and capital accumulation, and only occasionally respectful of the values of those communities being disruptive and reshaped by the technologies they introduce. To date, the tech industry feels only modest pressure to be fair, accountable, transparent, or help defray societal costs arising from the applications they deploy. Consider the pandemic, which continues to decimate lives throughout the world. While millions die and tens of millions lose their livelihood, the digital economy has expanded at a rapid pace, and those able to invest in tech firms have witnessed tremendous growth in their assets. Over the past decade, the percentage of productivity gains going to wage earners has decreased, while the percentage of gains going to the owners of capital, those of us who own stocks, has increased. Furthermore, 100% of productivity gains from each job that is automated go to the owners of capital. Consider the realization of the UN's 17 Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs, by 2030. For that timetable to be met, emerging technologies, and particularly AI, will play a central role. But it is important to consider the trade-offs. For example, SDG 8 sets the goal of decent work and economic growth. But if AI leads to the automation of many jobs, how will people get resources to maintain their lives in the absence of wages? Technological unemployment could undermine the realization of SDG 1, no poverty, and SDG 2, zero hunger. AI ethics, as well as AI for good or AI for everyone movements, have arisen to compensate for the excesses of the digital economy and adjust the trajectory of the digital revolution. As a first step, a consensus has grown around core AI principles championed by UNESCO, the OECD, and other leading institutions to guide the development and deployment of AI. In addition, a plethora of new initiatives focuses on digital access and tech-enabled opportunities for the least advantaged among us. This is all good news, but unfortunately, AI ethics and AI for good provide relatively weak tools in comparison to the momentum of the tech juggernaut. The second step in the campaign to nudge the trajectory of the tech revolution onto a more sustainable path is a focus on operationalizing AI principles. For example, the IEEE, the Institution for Electrical and Electronic Engineers, which has been setting international standards for more than a half century, is developing standards for the deployment of autonomous systems. Standards, along with laboratory practices and procedures and professional codes of conduct, fall into what is known as soft law, as opposed to the hard law formulated by governments. The advantage of soft laws are that they can be quickly formulated, modified, or discarded as the situation changes. However, soft law is seldom enforceable. One possible solution to this weakness is for governments to treat violations of well-established standards that cause harms as violations of public trust. Values and standards must be accompanied by effective governance. All countries are challenged by the desire to reap the benefits of emerging technologies while constraining the power of the digital oligopoly and the digital economy in order to mitigate undesired societal impacts. Unfortunately, there's a fundamental mismatch between the rapid deployment of innovative applications and the traditional slow pace of putting effective ethical legal oversight in place. To complicate matters, traditional narratives around competition, security, and unfettered innovation undermine the adoption of restraints and drive the trajectory of the digital revolution towards surveillance capitalism, the weaponization of digital tools, and an inability to recognize whether or when there are opportunities for international cooperation. Many countries have succumbed to a cult of innovation where all restrictions on AI are seen as stultifying growth and productivity. This epitomizes irresponsible innovation as companies reap the benefits of novel and often reap the rewards of novel and often destabilizing tools and techniques, but have no responsibilities for the societal costs of the technologies they deploy. That might be ameliorated by the minimum 15% tax on industries recently endorsed by the G20. Specific policies are needed, such as constraints on delegating decision-making authority to machines, which is an abrogation of human responsibility. But just as important is the development of new approaches to governance, 21st century approaches that will be agile and adaptive, increasingly reliant on soft law, and entail meaningful multi-stakeholder input. The management of AI requires a global governance network, including bottom-up representation from stakeholder networks, such as consumers, farmers, people with disabilities, and minority groups, each of which sends its own representatives to national and international bodies. In hopes of catalyzing the creation of a global governance network for AI, either within the UN or as a new international body, we organized the first International Congress for the Governance of AI, which was to have convened in Prague in May 2020. The pandemic forced a delay and then a transformation of the Congress into 2 online events. The online events did not have the impact to create the necessary momentum to move forward. More recently, we started an AI and Equality initiative at the Carnegie Council for Ethics and International Affairs, because we are concerned that AI exacerbates structural inequalities, creates new forms of inequity, and gives rise to an array of undesired societal impacts. In hopes of ameliorating these trends and putting in place new approaches for the governance of AI, we are building a team of senior advisors gifted in international affairs, tech policy, and AI research. Among those advisors is Cordell Green, chairman of the UNESCO Information for All program. Collectively, our advisors are knowledgeable about why so many initiatives have failed and committed to working together to forge new approaches to the governance of emerging technologies. Perhaps a value reset, soft law, and well-designed policies and governance reforms can nudge the technology trajectory onto a sustainable path. But to date, there is little evidence that the necessary policies and reforms will be fully embraced. I'm pro-technology and recognize our dependence on technology-enabled solutions. Nevertheless, a serious course adjustment is required. Thank you very much.